and your life will become hell. But if you observe them, then God will send the rain in its time, and you'll harvest in its time, and things will be good if you live by this book.
Mm-hmm. These are just a short prayer. Is that the entire script of what's inside the mezuzah?
Pretty much. I kind of translated it and made it a little shorter.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Messianic Jews?
Wow, they're kind of like ham and eggs.
They call themselves the Jews for Jesus, which I always thought was just on its face a nonsense notion.
Yeah, it's dishonest. I mean, you don't hear Muslims calling themselves completed Christians. It's the only form where people try to pretend to be one religion when they're another. There's no other precedence for Jews for Jesus, but Jews have overwhelmingly rejected Christianity for 2,000 years, but there's this small group of people who were born Jewish or who want to identify as Jews, but who believe that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. Now, what's interesting, if people believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that does not place them outside of Judaism, because there have been lots of different messiahs in Jewish history, and people with different beliefs about the Messiah. And many Chabad people believe that Menachem Schneerson is the Messiah. So people who believe that Jesus is Messiah are not outside of Judaism. What makes Messianic Jews outside the realm is when they start believing that Jesus is God, and that is completely contrary to the Jewish.
Have you ever had conversations with people who call themselves Jews for Jesus, Messianic Jews? Have you ever talked to them?
Yes. I remember my dad's a Christian theologian. There's a new biography of him out if anyone wants to read it. It's Desmond Ford, Reformist Theologian, Gospel Revivalist. And so I come from a background deep in Christianity. So for a little while there, when I was making the transition to Judaism, I'd try to get into conversations with Jews for Jesus and try to tell them that they're wrong and upbraid them for what they're doing. And news of it got back to my parents that I'd spoken to some Jews for Jesus very rudely, and so I basically gave up.
And this biography of your father, have you read it?
Yes, it's wonderful because it's written by someone who absolutely loves my father and sees him as a saint. This book is hagiography. It's the biography of a saint, and it's a beautiful thing for a son who's had a more complicated relationship with his father and who has grown up, in his father's home and never thought of his father as a saint, to read this book by someone who puts my father on a pedestal and just loves him so passionately and takes his side in all the disputes. It was very heartwarming for me to read it.
Does it make you appreciate your father more or see him more as a fraud?
It opens up my heart. I guess it makes me love him more.
Oh, that's nice.
It tells the story of how my father fell in love with my mother, and it quotes some of their correspondence and how he courted her and how they married, and then her long, painful, and losing battle with cancer. That part is particularly moving.
How old were you when your mom passed?
I was 4 years old,
Oh.
and also on my shelf I've got a book that she wrote that she published a year before she died called Fireside Stories. It's a book of children's stories, and when I got my hands on it, I read it through very carefully, looking for messages that she might have sent me, and if there's a message in there, it's the message is to be a good Christian.
Oops.
What?
What do you think of Kabbalah?
I think it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And do you know any of those people?
No, I don't. I stay away from it. I kind of tune out as soon as I hear it. I haven't spent any time at the Kabbalah Center. I'm not interested really in spending time around people who are into that, unless they're very hot and very female. Then I will relax my standards.
I understand. And they're Jewish mystics is what they call Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and I'm not sure what it's even in reference to. I don't understand. I just know that it's kooky. The people wearing red strings around their wrists and holy water that's very expensive, and it just seems like a con.
It does seem like a con, and I always thought it was a con. And then I read a very fair-minded and generous study of the Kabbalah Center by a scholar at the California State University at Northridge, Jody Myers, and it kind of just interprets it as an interesting religious movement within Judaism, but largely appealing to non-Jews. So if people are really interested in the Kabbalah Center, I'd recommend they read this book by Jody Myers. It kind of opened my eyes, and it's funny, like whenever there's a new religious movement, people call it a cult. It's like it's the easy, cheap put down. It's a con, it's a cult. Well, it's something that doesn't speak to me. It's in a language that I don't get. I'm not mystical. But it's worthy of study if one is interested in such things.
Mm-hmm. If you went to the Kabbalah Center, do you suspect you would recognize the basis, the Jewish basis of the faith?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are two interesting streams within the Kabbalah Center. The core are people who are fully observant of Orthodox Judaism, and then there are the popular masses who flock there. But the two streams are very separate. There's not like intermarriage between the Orthodox Jews, who are the core of the Kabbalah Center, and then the non-Jews and the non-Orthodox Jews who attend. It's very welcoming and loving, but there are two very distinct streams, worlds within the Kabbalah Center.
Mm-hmm. Why doesn't Judaism prohibit premarital sex? Almost every religion, I'm painting with an awfully broad brush, I shouldn't say that. Most of the largest religions have a prohibition against premarital sex. Judaism does not.
I don't believe that's correct. Traditionally, Judaism has forbidden premarital sex. And as you say, virtually every religion and organized traditional religion in the world does forbid premarital sex. But then there's theory and there's practice. And in practice, conservative Christianity regards sexual sins as the biggest sins, meaning that portion of Roman Catholicism that is traditional, and then evangelical Christianity and fundamentalist Christianity, they regard sexual sins as the biggest sins. So I'll give an example from my own life. When I was struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome, I went through a very religious phase where I did not engage in self-abuse for a year. I went without onanism for a year. And then
wait a minute. Why aren't you calling it masturbation? You don't like that word?
Well, I want to give a more elevated name for your audience so that they they're hearing this from Rabbi Luke. And then I met this woman who had E-cup breasts, and I kind of I threw my balls aside, and I jumped into bed with her, and I did her every opportunity I had. And then I met this other woman, and I did the same thing to her. And then I was doing all this at my parents' house. My parents are very conservative Christians. And when they found out, they were so upset, they wrote me out of the will. And it really destroyed my relationship with my parents, because to them, these sexual sins are like the biggest sins. While even among Orthodox Jews, while premarital sex is a sin, it's no more a sin than eating non-kosher or violating the Sabbath or speaking needless gossip or cheating on your taxes, or there are hundreds of sins in Judaism. So
and it's no worse than any
Jews.
Yeah.
They don't put sex on a pedestal and say this is the very worst.
Where is the prohibition to premarital sex in Judaism? Where would I find that?
That is a very good question, and it's certainly not explicit in the Torah, but there, and the rabbis will interpret it. And as we are speaking, I am Googling what's wrong with premarital sex from AskMoses.com, and what is the Torah prohibiting premarital sex? There we go. Now I've got it. So hurry up, my stupid computer. I'm on the radio, guys. Come on, give me